This podcast is titled Less Important, More Important, and it's taken from Luke 6. Throughout his ministry, Jesus was at odds with religious leaders about the Sabbath, although there were other differences as well. On one Sabbath, his disciples were walking through a field of grain, and, being hungry, they plucked the heads of grain, removed the husk by rubbing their hands, and ate the grain. When the religious leaders saw it, and I can't tell you why they were following the disciples around in a field of grain, they objected to this supposed harvesting of grain on the Sabbath. There is exaggeration in their comments. Picking up a few heads of grain is hardly harvesting. Second, it was not permitted by Pharisaical law, but it was not specifically prohibited by Mosaic law. In other words, the leaders were putting their own laws ahead of God's laws. Jesus' reply was to cite King David entering the sanctuary of God and eating the bread of God's presence that was on the sacred table. Only the priests were permitted to do this. Jesus also cited priests that violated Sabbath rules. Jesus also claimed to be the Lord of the Sabbath, even greater than the Sabbath, greater than the temple, and that God desires compassion to a greater extent than sacrifice. On another Sabbath, a man with an abnormal right hand was about to be healed by Jesus, which could bring an accusation of working on the Sabbath. They asked Jesus if this was lawful, without specifying if it was one of their laws or the laws of Moses. And Jesus counters that any of them would rescue a lamb that fell into a ditch on the Sabbath. Unlike that man, the lamb was worth some money to the leaders. But Jesus read their every thought, as he did on at least several other occasions, and so he called the man with the hand problem to stand in the middle of the room. He asked the leaders if it was better to harm or heal on the Sabbath, but no one answered. Brian Simmons comments at this point that Jesus can heal us, but religion never can. Jesus stated that he came to save a life, the man's, but they had come to destroy a life, the sheep, or even more likely, the life of Jesus. Here the text describes Jesus looking directly into the eyes of those present and being moved with indignation because of how hard their hearts were. Then, with everyone watching, Jesus healed the hand instantly. The Pharisees exploded with rage, quickly left the room, and began plotting how they could harm him. Because Jesus could read their thoughts, he left the room by another way. Yet he continued to heal people who had come from various parts of Israel and Galilee. Isn't it interesting that he left the room by another way? The same phrase that's used of the wise men back at the birth of Jesus, or after the birth of Jesus. Now, well away from the synagogue, the crowd was very close to Jesus, and thus his disciples brought him a boat, so he would not be crushed. He warned the crowd to not tell others about the healings or his actual identity. The reason he asked them to keep these secrets is explained in Isaiah. He will not quarrel or yell in public. He won't push aside those who are broken or bruised, and he will be gentle to the feeble and weak. Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 4. In his encounters with demons, they would fall at Jesus' feet, screaming, "You are the Son of God." But Jesus silenced them by ordering them not to reveal his identity. Now that we have heard a second time about Jesus not wanting his name revealed, we might ask, why? Perhaps most importantly, Jesus did not want to depart from the time frame for his death. If he was killed earlier, there would have been less evidence that he was killed purposefully. There might have been questions about why they wanted him dead, as one or two skirmishes with religious leaders might be dismissed as irrelevant. Keeping his identity secret would allow time for more evidence to accumulate of the injustice of his punishment. But the more people he helped, the more obvious was his caring for humanity as a whole could be realized. He was not killed for minor infractions of the law, but because of a deep-seated hatred of religious leaders, rooted in jealousy and their love for laws that they felt were equal to the laws of Moses. The more important reasons could stand out, reflecting that he died because of his love for all of us. This is Brother Don.